What kind of man chooses to live where the wind never stops? In 1801, a gentleman named Lockwood rides across the Yorkshire moors to meet his new landlord, a man called Heathcliff. The house sits on a ridge so exposed that the trees grow permanently bent, reaching away from the wind like beggars. The stones are blackened. The name carved above the door reads, Catherine Earnshaw, 1500. 5 centuries of the same family, battered by the same gales. Lockwood doesn't know it yet, but this house contains a love story so consuming it warped everything it touched. 2 families, 2 generations, the very landscape itself. He thinks he's renting a country cottage. He's walking into an open wound. Heathcliff greets him with closed teeth and a nod. The dogs attack without warning. The servants move as if hostility were the house's native climate. And yet Lockwood senses something beneath the man's brutality. Not warmth exactly, but depth. Heathcliff is described as a dark-skinned gentleman who loves and hates equally under cover, and esteems it an impertinence to be loved or hated in return. What Lockwood can't yet understand is that this man was hollowed out by a love so absolute it left nothing behind. Every locked door, every snarling dog, every curt syllable is a barricade built by a man who lost everything and won't let the world close enough to remind him. Lockwood returns the next day because he's a fool for company. This time the snow comes with him. He meets the household that orbits Heathcliff's misery, a beautiful young woman with golden ringlets and scornful eyes, who turns out to be Heathcliff's widowed daughter-in-law, and a rough young man with thick brown curls, who announces himself as Catherine Earnshaw, the name above the door, 5 centuries of gentry reduced to a man who eats with unwashed hands. No one speaks unless it's to wound. The tea is served under protest. The dead rabbits on the cushion aren't cushions at all. Lockwood stumbles from one humiliation to the next, mistaking every relationship until the snow traps him there. He wanted solitude. Now he's locked inside someone else's nightmare. That night, Lockwood is shown to a forbidden room, a bed built like a closet with panelled sides and a window ledge. On the ledge, scratched into the paint in a child's hand, one name repeats itself obsessively, Catherine Earnshaw. Catherine Heathcliff. 3 names for one girl, 3 possible lives. He leafs through her mildewed diary and finds a voice from 20 years ago, defiant, funny, furious. She and a boy called Heathcliff rebelled against a tyrant brother. They ran to the moors whenever the house became unbearable. She writes with an urgency that makes Lockwood's eyes close against his will. The names swim behind his lids. Catherine's everywhere. He dreams. A branch scrapes the window, or is it fingers? He reaches through the broken glass to push it away, and his hand closes on something ice-cold. Small fingers grip his wrist. A child's voice sobs through the storm. "Let me in! Let me in! I'm Catherine Linton." "I've come home. I'd lost my way on the moor." Terror makes him cruel. He drags the tiny wrist across the broken glass until blood soaks the bedclothes, but still the voice pleads. "It is 20 years, the ghost mourns. 20 years. I've been a waif for 20 years. Whether this is dream or haunting, Lockwood doesn't know. What he knows is the grief in that voice. Not anger, not malice, just an ache so old it has worn the boundary between living and dead paper thin. Lockwood screams. Heathcliff bursts in, white-faced, candle shaking in his grip. When Lockwood mentions the ghost, Catherine Linton, he says, a wicked little soul. Something breaks in Heathcliff that Lockwood was never meant to see. The older man climbs onto the bed, wrenches open the lattice, and cries into the snow and darkness with a grief so raw it strips away every mask. "Come in! Come in! Cathy, do come! Oh, do! Once more! Oh, my heart's darling, hear me this time! Catherine, at last!" The wind howls through. The candle blows out. No spectre answers. 20 years, and he's still calling her name into the void. This is not a man who lost his love. This is a man who was his love, and when she died, the living part of him died with her. Now the story winds backward. Nellie Dean, the housekeeper at Thrushcross Grange, agrees to tell Lockwood everything. She begins where it began, a summer morning when old Mr. Earnshaw walked 60 miles to Liverpool and came back carrying something no one wanted. Filthy, dark-haired, speaking gibberish, starving. He'd found it in the streets and couldn't leave it there. His wife recoiled. His son Hindley despised it on sight. His daughter Cathy spat at it. They named it Heathcliff, the name of a son who'd died. Just a word to fill a grave-shaped gap in the family. From the very first night, when Nellie left the child on the landing to be rid of it, and it crawled to Mr. Earnshaw's door, this foundling changed the chemistry of everything. The child learned silence the way other children learn speech. Hindley beat him. Nellie pinched him. He didn't cry. He didn't flinch. He simply absorbed it, took the blows like someone who'd decided long ago that pain was the price of existing. When Hindley's horse went lame, Heathcliff demanded they trade, not because he cared about horses, but because he'd discovered the only weapon a powerless person has, the willingness to suffer visibly and let the guilty squirm. Old Earnshaw began to prefer this silent, enduring foundling over his own blood, and that preference, born of guilt maybe, or recognition, planted the first seed of a hatred that would outlive everyone who felt it. Old Mr. Earnshaw died on an October evening quietly by the fire. The wind blustered outside, but the room was warm. Catherine had been singing him to sleep, her head against his knee, Heathcliff lying on the floor with his head in her lap. "Why canst thou not always be a good lass, Cathy?" he asked. "Why cannot you always be a good man, father?" she answered, laughing, and then she kissed his hand and sang softer until his fingers slipped from hers. Joseph found him. Catherine discovered the truth by reaching to embrace him good night. She screamed. Heathcliff screamed with her. And that night, alone in their room past midnight, the two children comforted each other with visions of heaven so beautiful that Nellie, weeping outside their door, wished they could all go there together. Hindley came home for the funeral and brought a wife, a nervous, bright-eyed woman who feared death and coughed when she climbed stairs. More importantly, he brought power. As the new master, Hindley stripped Heathcliff of everything, education, meals at the family table, a place by the fire. He was sent to the fields, made a labourer, reduced to exactly what the world had always told him he was, a dark-skinned foundling with no name and no claim. But Hindley miscalculated. Catherine didn't abandon Heathcliff. She met him in the fields, taught him what she learned, ran with him across the moors. Their bond didn't weaken under pressure. It became the only real thing either of them had. They ran wild together, two savages against the world, and every punishment Hindley invented only drove them closer. One Sunday they ran to Thrushcross Grange and peered through the windows at a world they'd never imagined. Crimson carpets, a crystal chandelier, two children, Edgar and Isabella Linton, weeping over a dog they'd fought about. Catherine and Heathcliff laughed at them. They thought it was paradise occupied by idiots. Then the Lintons' bulldogs seized Catherine's ankle, and the house swallowed her whole. Heathcliff watched from outside as they washed her feet, combed her beautiful hair, fed her cakes, wrapped her in warmth. When they threw him out, a wicked boy, unfit for a decent house. He stood at the window anyway, watching her kindle something in those pale Linton faces that he recognised as his own adoration reflected back in a language he didn't speak. That window would become the story's central image, someone always on the wrong side of the glass. 5 weeks later, Catherine came home transformed. She arrived on a black pony, wearing a feathered hat and silk frock, her brown ringlets arranged, her hands white from doing nothing. Hindley was delighted. His savage sister had become a lady. But when she flew to embrace Heathcliff, she stopped short and laughed. "Why, how very black and cross you look!" She didn't mean cruelty. She simply couldn't see that the distance the Lintons had created between them was already unbridgeable. Heathcliff stood there in 3 months of dirt, his hair matted, and felt what he would feel for the rest of his life, the particular agony of being loved by someone who was slowly learning to be ashamed of you. He bolted from the room. That Christmas Nelly tried. She washed him, combed his hair, told him he was fit for a prince in disguise. For a moment his face brightened. But when he stepped through the kitchen door, Hindley was waiting on the other side. The master shoved him back, banished him to the garret while the Linton children feasted below. Edgar Linton, fair-haired, blue-eyed, everything Heathcliff was not, mocked his hair, and Heathcliff flung a dish of hot apple sauce into his face. They dragged him upstairs and beat him. Later, Catherine climbed through a skylight across the roof to find him. He sat by the fire and told Nelly, with perfect calm, "I'm trying to settle how I shall pay Hindley back. I don't care how long I wait, if I can only do it at last." He was perhaps 12 years old. Time passed, and the gap widened. Hindley's wife died, leaving an infant son and a man who drank his way toward oblivion. Catherine became the queen of the countryside, beautiful, imperious, impossible. She kept 2 faces, the polished lady for the Lintons, the wild creature for Heathcliff. But Heathcliff was changing too. Hard labour and constant humiliation had stamped out his curiosity, his education, his boyhood. He acquired a slouching gait and a grim pleasure in being despised. He'd marked every evening Catherine spent with Edgar Linton on an almanac on the wall, crosses for Linton, dots for him. The crosses were winning. When he showed her, she didn't understand why it mattered. "What good do I get from your company?" she snapped. "You might be dumb or a baby for anything you say to amuse me." He had no answer. Edgar Linton arrived on horseback, and the contrast said everything words couldn't. Edgar saw Catherine slap a servant, lie about it, then strike a child. He watched her hit him across the ear. He walked to the door, pale and trembling. He should have left. Any reasonable man would have. But he looked back through the window and saw her weeping, and he was lost. He returned. The quarrel broke through the last wall between them, and by the time Nelly checked on them again, they'd stopped pretending to be friends and confessed themselves lovers. Edgar Linton was doomed, not because Catherine didn't love him, but because she did, in exactly the wrong way. She loved him like weather, pleasantly, when conditions were right. She loved Heathcliff like geology, the bedrock under everything, invisible and permanent and impossible to live on. Hindley Earnshaw was destroying himself the way some men destroy houses, from the inside, drunkenly, one beam at a time. His wife was dead, his bottles multiplied. And baby Hareton, his own son, lived in such terror of his father that Nelly hid the child in cupboards whenever she heard him coming. One night Hindley dangled the boy over the banister laughing, demanding kisses from a toddler too terrified to stop screaming. The child fell, and Heathcliff, arriving at the foot of the stairs, caught him by pure reflex, then looked up and realised what he'd done. He'd saved the son of the man he wanted to destroy. Nelly saw his face, not relief, not tenderness, but the blank fury of a man who'd accidentally spared his enemy a grief. Had it been dark, she says, he might have corrected the mistake. That's the kind of household this was, where saving a baby's life was a tactical error and love expressed itself as violence held temporarily in check. That same night, Catherine crept to the kitchen where Nelly sat rocking Hareton by the fire. She was restless, anxious, biting her lip. Edgar Linton had proposed. She'd accepted. But she needed someone to tell her she wasn't making a terrible mistake. Nelly, unmoved, quizzed her like a schoolteacher. Why do you love him? Because he's handsome. Bad. Because he's young and cheerful. Bad still. Because he loves me. Indifferent. It is he'll be rich. And I shall be the greatest woman of the neighbourhood. Worst of all. Every answer Catherine gave was a reason to marry someone, any presentable someone. None of them were reasons to marry Edgar Linton specifically. She knew it too. She struck her forehead with one hand and her breast with the other and cried, "Here and here!" In whichever place the soul lives, in my soul and in my heart, I'm convinced I'm wrong. What she couldn't say yet, what was building behind those flashing eyes like pressure behind glass, was that the right answer had nothing to do with Edgar at all. Then she told the truth. Not to Edgar, not to Heathcliff, to Nelly by firelight, with a sleeping baby between them. It would degrade me to marry Heathcliff now, she said. In the darkness, Heathcliff rose silently and left. He heard degradation. He didn't stay to hear what came next, and what came next was the most famous declaration of love in the English language. My love for Linton is like the foliage in the woods. Time will change it. My love for Heathcliff resembles the eternal rocks beneath, a source of little visible delight, but necessary. Nelly, I am Heathcliff. He's always, always in my mind, not as a pleasure any more than I am always a pleasure to myself, but as my own being. She was not choosing Edgar over Heathcliff. She was trying to save them both, marry Edgar's money and use it to lift Heathcliff from degradation. It was the most generous, the most selfish, and the most catastrophically naive plan ever devised. And, by the time she spoke the words that could have changed everything, the one person who needed to hear them was already gone. They searched everywhere. Heathcliff was gone into a summer night that turned violent, lightning splitting a tree at the corner of the house, rain lashing the moors in sheets. Catherine stood outside past midnight, bonnetless, calling his name into the darkness, soaking herself to the bone while the storm broke overhead. She wouldn't come in. She didn't care. The next morning they found her shivering by the dead fire, pale as a drowned thing, the beginning of a brain fever already kindling behind her eyes. She nearly died. The old Mrs. Hare. Linton nursed her back to health and caught the fever herself. She and her husband both died within days, as if Catherine's survival demanded payment in other lives. Where Heathcliff went, no one knew. 3 years of silence. Catherine recovered, grew haughtier, married Edgar Linton at Gimmerton Chapel on a day that everyone called happy. Nelly left the Heights and little Hareton behind, following her mistress to the Grange. She wept at leaving the boy. But Catherine's tears were always louder than anyone else's. For half a year the Grange was paradise. Edgar worshipped Catherine. Catherine allowed herself to be worshipped. The gunpowder lay harmless as sand, Nelly says, because no fire came near to explode it. They sat together in windows at dusk, watching the mist rise over the valley of Gimmerton, and believed they were happy. They were the way a house built on a fault line is happy between earthquakes. Then one September evening, Nelly was carrying apples from the garden when a voice spoke from the darkness behind her. Deep, foreign in tone. "Nelly, is that you?" She turned. A tall man stood in the porch, dressed in dark clothes, face half hidden. She didn't recognize him until a ray of light caught his eyes, those deep-set black eyes she'd known since boyhood. Heathcliff had come back, transformed. No longer a degraded stable boy, but a tall, athletic, dignified man in a gentleman's coat, with an air that suggested military service and foreign education. How he'd done it, where he'd been, what money had remade him, no one would ever know. "I'm in hell till you tell me." Catherine flew upstairs, breathless, half mad with joy. "Oh, Edgar, Heathcliff's come back," and seized her husband in an embrace so tight it was closer to assault than affection. Edgar suggested the kitchen as a more suitable place for their guest. Catherine's eyes flashed. Set 2 tables, one for gentry, one for Heathcliff and myself, being of the lower orders. "Will that please you, dear?" In the parlour, fully revealed by fire and candlelight, Heathcliff's transformation amazed everyone. Tall, athletic, erect, his manner even dignified, beside whom Edgar seemed slender and youth-like. A half-civilized ferocity still lurked in those depressed brows and eyes full of black fire, but it was subdued. Catherine could not stop looking at him. She seized his hands and laughed like one beside herself. "I shall think it a dream tomorrow." He told her quietly that he'd planned to see her face once and then kill himself. Her welcome had changed his mind. Edgar grew pale, watching his wife behave as if the last 3 years, their courtship, their wedding, their happiness, had been a waiting room, and the real person she'd been waiting for had finally walked through the door. The real danger came from an unexpected quarter. Isabella Linton, fair-skinned, golden-haired, 18 and sheltered, began to fall for Heathcliff with the doomed certainty of a moth circling a lamp. When Catherine discovered it, she tried genuinely to save her. "He's not a rough diamond or a pearl containing oyster. He's a fierce, pitiless, wolfish man. I'd as soon put that little canary into the park on a winter's day as recommend you to bestow your heart on him. He'd crush you like a sparrow's egg." Isabella didn't listen. She called Catherine a dog in the manger, accused her of wanting all love for herself, and declared she loved Heathcliff more than Catherine had ever loved Edgar. Catherine turned cold. Later, alone with Heathcliff, she asked whether he cared for Isabella. He said nothing. Then, after a silence, he asked one question that told Nelly everything about his intentions. "She's her brother's heir, is she not?" Not a question about love, a question about inheritance. Heathcliff was not courting Isabella Linton. He was calculating the shortest route to destroying everything Edgar Linton possessed. It couldn't hold. Nelly told Edgar that Heathcliff had been embracing Isabella in the courtyard. Edgar descended to the kitchen and delivered his verdict quietly. Your presence is a moral poison. I require your instant departure." Heathcliff measured him with derision. "This lamb of yours threatens like a bull. I'm mortally sorry that you are not worth knocking down." Edgar sent for servants. Catherine blocked the door, locked it, and flung the key into the hottest part of the fire. "Fair means," she cried. "If you haven't the courage to attack him, make an apology or allow yourself to be beaten." She wanted them to fight, genuinely, physically, so she could see which man was real. Edgar stood trembling, white-faced, humiliated. Then Heathcliff pushed his chair, and something in Edgar Linton's gentle nature finally cracked. He sprang up and struck Heathcliff full on the throat, a blow that would have levelled a slighter man. Then he walked out through the back door and summoned armed servants. But Heathcliff was already gone, smashing the lock from the inner door with a poker. The war had begun. Upstairs, Catherine threw herself on the sofa and announced her strategy with the clarity of a general planning scorched earth. "If I cannot keep Heathcliff for my friend, if Edgar will be mean and jealous, I'll try to break their hearts by breaking my own." She said it without shame, as if self-destruction were simply another weapon in her arsenal. Edgar came to her, not with anger, but with sorrowful calm. "Will you give up Heathcliff hereafter, or will you give up me? It is impossible for you to be my friend and his at the same time." She couldn't answer. She rang the bell until it broke. She flung herself against the furniture, grinding her teeth, tearing at her hair until blood appeared on her lips. She went rigid, eyes rolled upward, then bolted from the room and locked herself in her chamber. She would not come out for 3 days. No food, no company, no Edgar. She had made her choice, not between 2 men, but between 2 ways of dying. She would punish them both by punishing herself, and she would do it so thoroughly that by the time anyone understood what was happening, it would be too late to stop. On the 3rd day she unbarred the door. She hadn't eaten, she hadn't slept. She was no longer entirely Catherine. She tore feathers from her pillow and sorted them by species. Turkey, wild duck, pigeon, lapwing, narrating memories attached to each bird, a nest on the moor, a promise Heathcliff once made about never shooting lapwings again. Her mind had abandoned the present and retreated to childhood, to the heights, to the only time she'd been whole. When she caught sight of herself in the mirror, she didn't recognize her own face. "Who is it?" she asked, terrified. "I hope it will not come out when you are gone. The room is haunted." Nelly covered the glass with a shawl, but Catherine kept seeing movement behind it, kept insisting a stranger stared at her from the wall. Then she said the truest thing. "Oh, if I were but in my own bed in the old house! I thought as I lay there that I was a child again, and my father was just buried, and Hindley had ordered me separated from Heathcliff. I lifted my hand to push the panels aside. It struck the table-top, and memory burst in. She was 20 years old. She was losing her mind to homesickness for a self she'd abandoned 7 years ago. She forced the window open, in the middle of winter, the northeast wind cutting like a blade, and leaned out into the darkness, convinced she could see the lights of Wuthering Heights miles away. She called to Heathcliff as though he stood just beyond the garden wall. "We've braved the ghosts at Gimmerton Kirk together. If I dare you now, will you venture? I'll not lie there by myself. They may bury me 12 feet deep, but I won't rest till you are with me." "I never will." Edgar found her hanging from the casement, nightgown soaked in icy air, and the haggardness of her face struck him speechless. The doctor was summoned. He called it brain fever, and warned that permanent damage to her mind was more likely than death. That same night, while the household sat vigil over Catherine's writhing form, Isabella Linton was galloping through the darkness on Heathcliff's horse, her little dog left hanging by a handkerchief from a hook in the garden. One woman was losing her mind. The other was about to lose everything else. Catherine survived, but something essential didn't. Edgar nursed her with a devotion that consumed his own health, sitting by her bed for weeks, watching every flicker of her eyelids, feeding her by hand. The doctor warned that what he'd saved from the grave would only repay his care by forming a source of constant future anxiety. In March he placed golden crocuses on her pillow. Her eyes, long strangers to any gleam of pleasure, caught them and shone. "These are the earliest flowers at the Heights," she whispered. "They remind me of soft thaw winds and nearly melted snow." Even in recovery her mind turned homeward, not to the Grange where she lay, but to the house on the ridge where she'd once been herself. She told Edgar she would never go there but once more, and then she'd remain for ever. She was right, though he didn't know it yet. She was also pregnant, carrying the heir that might secure the Linton estate from Heathcliff's designs. 2 lives suspended in one fragile body that had already tried to destroy itself. A letter arrived from Wuthering Heights in Isabella's handwriting. It read like a dispatch from hell. She described her arrival at the farmhouse after dark, the filthy kitchen, the wild child Hareton who set a bulldog on her, Joseph's deliberate contempt, and Hindley, who appeared at a side door like a ghost of his former self, eyes annihilated of beauty, and showed her a pistol-knife he kept to murder Heathcliff. "Is Mr. Heathcliff a man?" she wrote. "If so, is he mad? And if not, is he a devil? I beseech you to explain what I have married." There were no servants, no bedroom prepared, no welcome of any kind. She'd spent her first night seated at the stairs' head, weeping in the dark, while Hindley paced and cursed below, and Joseph refused her even a candle. The golden-haired girl who'd loved Heathcliff against all warning was learning what Catherine had always known, that he was not a hero of romance wearing a rough exterior, but exactly the fierce, pitiless man Catherine had described. "I do hate him. I am wretched. I have been a fool." Nelly visited the Heights, and found Isabella already transformed, her pretty face wan and listless, her ringlets hanging limp, her dress unchanged since the day before. She'd become part of the house's neglect, absorbed into its decay, the way a plant withers in toxic soil. Heathcliff, by contrast, had never looked better, composed, well-dressed, the only decent thing in the room. When Isabella dared to call him a lying fiend and a monster, he seized her and thrust her from the room. Then he turned to Nelly and spoke the truest confession of his life. "I have no pity. I have no pity. The more the worms writhe, the more I yearn to crush out their entrails. It is a moral teething, and I grind with greater energy in proportion to the increase of pain. Not a boast, not a threat, a diagnosis. A diagnosis." He was describing his own nature the way a surgeon describes disease, without judgment, without apology, with the cold precision of a man who has looked inside himself and found machinery where mercy should be. Then he told Nelly why she was really there, Catherine. He demanded a secret meeting, and he would have it by negotiation or by force. Heathcliff had been haunting the Grange garden for weeks, 6 hours every night, pacing in the darkness beneath Catherine's window. He demanded Nelly arrange a secret visit. She refused. 50 times she refused. He offered threats, then reason, then something closer to prayer. "I swear I meditate no harm. I only wish to hear from herself how she is. But if you won't help me, I'll force my way in. I'll knock Linton down. I'll threaten the servants with pistols." Wouldn't it be better to prevent all that? In the end, Nelly agreed, not because he was right, but because the alternative was worse. She would carry his letter to Catherine. If Catherine consented, she'd signal him when Edgar was away. She told herself she was preventing mischief. She told herself it might help Catherine's mind recover. But walking home alone in the dark, bonnet clutched to her chest, she knew the truth. She had just opened the last door between two people whose love had already destroyed one household and was about to consume another. Every tragedy has a moment when someone stops resisting the inevitable. This was hers. On a Sunday morning, while the family was at church, Nelly delivered Heathcliff's letter to Catherine. She sat by the open window in a loose white dress, her appearance utterly changed. The wild, spirited girl replaced by something luminous and fading, with eyes that no longer looked at the world around her, but seemed to gaze beyond it into some country only she could see. She didn't read the letter so much as hold it, running her finger over the name at the bottom. Then Heathcliff was in the room, not invited, not announced, simply there, crossing to her in 2 strides and gathering her into his arms. He neither spoke nor let go for 5 minutes. Nelly saw what he saw the instant he beheld her, that there was no recovery here. She was leaving. The same conviction settled on them both like weather, not as opinion but as fact. When he finally spoke, his voice made no attempt to disguise his despair. "Oh, Cathy! Oh, my life! How can I bear it?" What followed was not a conversation, but a mutual annihilation. Catherine turned on him first. "You and Edgar have broken my heart. You have killed me, and thriven on it." She seized his hair and held him down on his knees. "Will you forget me? Will you say 20 years hence, that's the grave of Catherine Earnshaw. I loved her long ago, but it is past." Heathcliff wrenched free and stood over her, shaking. When Nelly looked at them, she saw bruises forming on Catherine's white arm, where his fingers had gripped too hard, and torn hair in Catherine's fist. These were people who could not love without leaving marks. "You have killed yourself," he told her. "You loved me. Then what right had you to leave me? Misery and degradation and death and nothing that God or Satan could inflict would have parted us. You, of your own will, did it. I have not broken your heart. You have broken it. And in breaking it, you have broken mine. So much the worse for me that I am strong. Do I want to live? What kind of living will it be when you... Oh, God! Would you like to live with your soul in the grave?" Catherine softened, not with apology, but with longing. "I only wish us never to be parted. Come here and kneel down again. You never harmed me in your life." But Heathcliff would not let her see his face. She spoke to him as if already half gone. "I'm wearying to escape into that glorious world, not seeing it dimly through tears, but really with it and in it. I shall be incomparably beyond and above you all." Then she rose from the chair. Something broke open between them. Catherine made a spring and he caught her, and they were locked in an embrace from which Nelly thought her mistress would never be released alive. He held her like something being stolen from him in real time. Church bells had stopped. Edgar's step sounded on the stairs. "You must not go," she shrieked. "It is the last time. I shall die." He would not leave. She would not release him. Edgar found them. Heathcliff placed her unconscious body in her husband's arms and said, "Look there. Unless you be a fiend, help her first. Then you shall speak to me." About 12 o'clock that night, Catherine died, having never recovered consciousness enough to miss Heathcliff, or no Edgar. 2 hours earlier, a puny 7 months child had been born, the younger Catherine, who would carry her mother's name into a world shaped by the violence of both her parents' choices. Next morning, sunlight stole through the blinds and illuminated the dead woman's face. Her brow was smooth, her lips wearing the expression of a smile. Nelly went out at sunrise to find Heathcliff. He was leaning against an old ash tree, hatless, his hair soaked with dew, so still that nesting birds had come within 3 feet of him. He already knew. "She's dead. Damn you all, she wants none of your tears." Then came the prayer that would define his remaining years. "Catherine Earnshaw, may you not rest as long as I am living. Haunt me then, be with me always, take any form, drive me mad. Only do not leave me in this abyss where I cannot find you." He dashed his head against the trunk and howled, not like a man, but like a savage beast being goaded to death with knives and spears. They buried Catherine on the Friday, not in the chapel under the carved Linton monument, nor beside the Earnshaw tombs outside, but on a green slope in the corner of the kirkyard, where the wall was so low that heath and bilberry plants had climbed over from the moor. Wild ground, between the civilized dead and the untamed earth, exactly where she belonged. During the days her coffin lay open, Heathcliff kept vigil outside, passing in the darkness beneath her window. On Tuesday night Nelly opened a window for him. He entered so silently that only one sign betrayed his visit. The locket around Catherine's neck had been opened, Edgar's fair lock of hair cast out and replaced with a black one of Heathcliff's own. Nelly found both on the floor, twisted them together, and enclosed them as one. Even in death these 2 men contended over her, and she, beyond all claiming now, smiled her strange, peaceful smile. On the night of Catherine's funeral, Isabella arrived at the Grange. Out of breath, laughing hysterically, her hair streaming wet with snow, a deep cut beneath one ear. She told her story in wild fragments. Hindley had locked Heathcliff out and waited with a pistol knife. Heathcliff smashed through the window like something inhuman, his teeth gleaming white in a snow-covered face, wrenched the weapon free, kicked Hindley to the ground, and trampled him while holding Isabella with one hand. When she taunted Heathcliff about Catherine, "She wouldn't have borne your abominable behaviour quietly," he flung a dinner knife at her head. She pulled it from beneath her ear and ran through the snow, over marshes, through the dark, until the beacon light of the Grange guided her home. She burned her wedding ring in the fire, kissed Edgar's and Catherine's portraits, and drove away south. She never returned. Within 6 months, Hindley was dead at 27. Heathcliff held the mortgages on the entire estate. The orphan who'd arrived with nothing now owned everything. On the day they carried Hindley's coffin from the house, Heathcliff lifted young Hareton onto the table and murmured with peculiar gusto, "Now, my bonny lad, you are mine. And we'll see if one tree won't grow as crooked as another, with the same wind to twist it." The child stroked Heathcliff's whiskers and played with his face. He didn't know he was looking at the man who had stolen his inheritance, mortgaged his birthright, and intended to raise him as a savage, the heir of Wuthering Heights, reduced to a labourer on his own land. Meanwhile, Edgar withdrew into grief and solitude. He threw up his magistracy, abandoned church, avoided the village entirely. His world contracted to the park, the moors, and evening visits to his wife's grave. But he was not entirely desolate. The tiny orphan Cathy, never Catherine, never the full name that belonged to the dead, wielded a despot sceptre in his broken heart. Time brought him not happiness, but a melancholy sweeter than common joy. 12 years dissolved like mist off the moors. Young Cathy grew like a larch, slender, golden, impossibly alive, with the Earnshaw's dark eyes set in the Linton's fair skin. She had her mother's capacity for intense attachment without her fury, her father's gentleness without his frailty. Edgar educated her himself, and never spoke a harsh word in her life. She was a perfect recluse who had never once been beyond the park gates alone. Wuthering Heights did not exist for her. Heathcliff was not even a name. The golden rocks of Penistone Crags gleamed on the horizon like a promised land she wasn't permitted to enter. "How long will it be before I can walk to the top of those hills?" she'd ask Nelly. "I wonder what lies on the other side. Is it the sea?" It wasn't the sea. It was a house where a man she'd never met was raising her cousin as a brute, holding her other cousin as a pawn, and nursing a revenge that had already consumed one generation and was preparing, with patient malice, to consume the next. One summer day, while Edgar was away, 13-year-old Cathy saddled her pony and rode straight for the forbidden crags. Nelly found her at Wuthering Heights, seated in her dead mother's childhood chair, laughing and chattering to a great rough lad of 18, who stared at her with bewildered fascination. This was Hareton, the heir whose inheritance Heathcliff had devoured, raised without books or manners, who couldn't read his own family name carved above the door. When Cathy ordered him to fetch her pony like a servant, he snarled, "I'll see thee damned before I be thy servant." She had never heard such language in her life. When the housekeeper revealed this coarse young man was her cousin, Cathy burst into tears of horrified disbelief. She who was always love and darling and angel could not comprehend that someone of her own blood might curse and go roughshod and not know his alphabet. Hareton, ashamed, fetched her a terrier puppy as a peace offering. She wouldn't take it. Isabella died when her son was 12. Edgar brought the boy home. Linton Heathcliff, pale and peevish, who cried when the chair was uncomfortable, couldn't eat porridge, and had never been told he had a father. But that same night Joseph arrived from the Heights to claim the child. He was Heathcliff's property, and Heathcliff would have him. At dawn, Nelly carried the bewildered boy across the moors on horseback. At the farmhouse door Heathcliff took one look at his son, the fair curls, the languid eyes, the thin, whining frame, and laughed. God, what a beauty! What a lovely, charming thing! Haven't they reared it on snails and sour milk? He dragged the weeping child between his knees and inspected him like livestock, pushing back the flaxen curls, feeling the slender arms, the small fingers. Then he told Nelly the truth. "My son is prospective owner of your master's place, my child hiring their children to till their father's lands for wages. That is the sole consideration which can make me endure the whelp. I despise him for himself, and hate him for the memories he revives." On the anniversary of her mother's death, always the day Edgar walked alone to the kirkyard, 16-year-old Cathy ventured onto the moors, and Heathcliff found her there. He brought her to the Heights, where she rediscovered Linton. He'd grown tall, but remained languid and sickly, with a temporary brightness borrowed from the spring sun. Cathy kissed him and called Heathcliff uncle, and asked why they'd never visited. Heathcliff watched with a predator's patience, softening his voice, smiling when she looked his way. Privately, he told Nelly his plan: the two cousins would fall in love and marry. If Linton died without the marriage, and his life was quite uncertain, Catherine's inheritance would pass to Heathcliff. With the marriage, young Cathy would become joint successor. Every gentle word he spoke to her, every smile, every invitation to return, was a move in a game whose stakes were property and whose pieces were children. He was not a man who had learned to love again. He was a man who had learned that love could be used. While Cathy and Linton explored the garden, Heathcliff confided in Nelly with the quiet satisfaction of an architect reviewing a completed structure. He spoke of Hareton, how he'd denied him every advantage, bent his malevolence on making the boy a brute who took pride in his own brutishness. "I've got him faster than his scoundrel of a father secured me, and lower. I know what he suffers now, exactly. It is merely a beginning of what he shall suffer. His had first-rate qualities, and they are lost, rendered worse than unavailing." Heathcliff had studied what Hindley had done to him and replicated it with surgical refinements. Denied education, denied ambition, denied the knowledge that anything had been stolen. And he had made Hareton love him. The boy whose inheritance he'd stolen, whose mind he'd crippled, whose future he'd annihilated, that boy defended Heathcliff against all comers. "I've outmatched Hindley there," he told Nelly. And he had. The crooked tree had grown exactly as the wind intended. Despite Edgar's prohibition, Cathy began a secret correspondence with Linton, letters daily through a milk-boy, replies hidden in a locked drawer that had once held trinkets and playthings. The letters were foolish and ardent, with touches Nelly suspected were borrowed from a more experienced source, Heathcliff coaching his sickly pawn. When Nelly discovered the cash and confronted her, Cathy dropped to her knees in pure terror. "Oh, give them to me, and I'll never do so again. Don't tell Papa." Nelly was unmoved. She carried the letters to the fire. As the flames curled up the chimney, Cathy thrust her hand into the blaze and pulled out half-consumed fragments at the expense of her burned fingers, clutching the charred remains of her first love as if they were the last evidence of something precious that the adult world insisted on destroying. Nelly answered the final letter with a single slip of paper. "Master Heathcliff is requested to send no more note to Miss Linton, as she will not receive them." The milk-boy came with empty pockets after that. Another door closed between young hearts and Heathcliff's designs. Summer ended and autumn drew on. Edgar caught a cold that settled obstinately on his lungs and confined him indoors for the winter. Cathy grew sadder and duller, walking the park paths alone, stopping to cry over moss and blanched grass, as if the dying season were a rehearsal for something she couldn't name. On a raw October afternoon she climbed the park wall to retrieve her fallen hat, and couldn't scale the smooth stones back, trapped on Heathcliff's side. He found her there on horseback, and told her Linton was dying for love of her, that grief and disappointment were hastening his death. Imagine your father in my place, and Linton in yours. I swear on my salvation he's going to his grave, and none but you can save him." Nelly shouted from behind the wall that it was lies, all lies. But Cathy's heart was already clouded in double darkness, above this new guilt below. Walking home in the rain, her features were so changed with sorrow they didn't seem her own. Every trap Heathcliff set depended on the same mechanism, the goodness of the people he manipulated. Cathy went to the Heights, not from love but from pity, that counterfeit of love that Heathcliff counted on. She found Linton draped across a sofa like a discarded puppet, whimpering that she had broken her promise to visit. When she moved to comfort him, he twisted her kindness into a quarrel about their parents. "Your mother hated your father," he hissed, and Cathy shoved his chair until he coughed himself into a fit. Then she knelt beside him, horrified at what she'd done, stroking his hair and begging forgiveness. This was their courtship, cruelty and guilt in equal measures, each visit leaving her more entangled. By evening she was promising to return, swearing she loved him, and Linton was wiping his eyes with the satisfaction of a child who has learned that tears are the most efficient form of currency. During Nelly's illness that winter, Cathy rode to the Heights every evening after dark and returned before dawn, a secret sustained for weeks. She confessed it all when caught, the milk boy as messenger, the moonlit gallops across frozen moors, Linton's tearful demands for more visits, more promises. But it was an accidental encounter that mattered most. She had found Hareton at the gate one afternoon, and he pointed to the carved inscription above the door, Catherine Earnshaw's, and told her with rough pride, "I can read that now." She laughed in his face. "Can the dog read too?" Hareton flushed crimson and turned away. When Linton mocked him as well, Hareton seized the frail boy by the collar and shook him until blood speckled Linton's lips from coughing. She never noticed that the strong man's shame cut deeper than the weak boy's blood. Edgar was dying. He knew it with the quiet certainty of a man who had spent his life believing in gentleness, and now believed only in the approaching reunion with his Catherine. His face had gone translucent. You could almost see the light passing through him. He asked Nelly whether Linton might be brought to the Grange, or if Cathy might be permitted to visit him on the moors, chaperoned and brief. He wanted his daughter settled before he left her. "I'd rather resign her to God and lay her in the earth beside me," he whispered, "than leave her exposed to Heathcliff's plans." But he had no strength left to fight, and so he made the compromise that desperate fathers make, a controlled meeting on neutral ground, pretending that supervision could protect innocence from the man who had already calculated every move 3 steps ahead. They found Linton on the moors, lying in the heather like something discarded. He didn't rise until they were upon him, and then walked so feebly that Cathy's greeting died on her lips. He was worse, immeasurably worse, but insisted he was better, trembling, gripping her hand as though it were the only thing holding him to the earth. They sat together in the grass while he drifted in and out of consciousness, unable to sustain conversation, unable to remember what she'd said moments before. When Cathy proposed leaving, terror seized him, not of losing her, but of what his father would do if she left too soon. "Don't provoke him against me," he whispered, glancing up the hill toward the Heights. "He is very hard." She asked if Heathcliff was cruel to him. Linton only looked at her and did not answer. The silence told her everything the boy was too frightened to say. The trap closed on a Thursday. Linton was weeping when they arrived. "My father threatened me," he stammered. "I'm a traitor, and he'll kill me." And before Cathy could make sense of his terror, Heathcliff appeared on the path above them. He was pleasant, almost fatherly. He invited them inside for a rest. The door closed behind them with a sound Nelly would remember for the rest of her life, the scrape of a key turning in a lock. Heathcliff dropped all pretence. "I want the marriage performed tomorrow," he told them, and when Cathy snatched at the key, he seized her, pulled her onto his knee, and administered a shower of terrific slaps on both sides of her head, each blow hard enough to have knocked her down if she'd been standing. She was 17 years old. Her father was dying 5 miles away. Nobody was coming to help. They were prisoners. Heathcliff locked them in an upstairs room overnight, Cathy and Nelly together, with neither food nor candle. Cathy pressed against the window all night, staring south toward the Grange where her father lay dying without her. She begged. She reasoned. She screamed until her throat was raw. Nobody came. When dawn broke grey through the glass, she told Nelly in a voice gone flat and strange, "If Papa thought I had left him on purpose, and he died before I returned, could I bear to live?" In the morning Heathcliff dragged her out to marry Linton. The ceremony took place somewhere in the house, brief and forced. The marriage that would give Heathcliff legal claim to everything, the Grange, the Linton fortune, Cathy herself, was accomplished in minutes, a transaction wrapped in the thinnest paper of legitimacy. Nelly was imprisoned for 5 days. When she was finally released, she learned that Cathy had escaped through a window, her mother's old bedroom window, climbing down the fir tree that grew against the wall, the same tree whose branches had scraped the glass in Lockwood's nightmare months before. Cathy ran the 5 miles across the moors in darkness, arriving at the Grange just in time. Edgar was conscious, barely. He gathered his daughter to him and told her that he was going to Catherine at last, and that Cathy would come to them both in time. "I am going to her, and you, darling child, shall come to us." He died in the night, as quietly as he had lived, without violence, without rage, without any of the operatic fury that consumed the house on the hill. Just a gentle man whose light went out while his daughter held his hand. Heathcliff came for everything. He came for Cathy, ordering her back to the Heights. He came for Catherine's portrait, tearing it from the wall. And he came for Catherine herself. He told Nelly, with the calm of a man describing breakfast, that he had bribed the sexton to open Catherine's coffin. 18 years in the ground, and her face was still hers. He had loosened one side of the casket, and paid the man to pull away the corresponding side of his own coffin when the time came, so that their dust would mingle. "I was tranquil," he said. "Her presence was with me at last. For 18 years he had been haunted, not by her ghost, but by her absence. Every night for 18 years, opening doors to empty rooms. Now the grave was opened and the arrangement made, and he could wait." Cathy stood in the doorway watching him, and spoke with a kind of dreary triumph. "Mr. Heathcliff, you have nobody to love you. However miserable you make us, we shall still have the revenge of thinking that your cruelty arises from your greater misery. You are miserable, are you not? Lonely like the devil, and envious like him. Nobody loves you. Nobody will cry for you when you die. I wouldn't be you." Linton died that winter, and with him went Cathy's last claim to tenderness at Wuthering Heights. Heathcliff had seized the Linton estate through the marriage, and Cathy was left with nothing, no property, no money, no ally. She lived like a servant in the house where her mother had once been queen. She would sit by the fire without speaking, without reading, for Heathcliff had burned her books, staring into the flames with an expression that drifted between contempt and despair. Hareton tried once to reach her. He left a gift by her chair, a wrapped bundle that turned out to be a handful of dried crab-apples from a tree she had admired. She wouldn't look at him. He told her he had done everything he could, that he'd asked Heathcliff to let her have her books back. She answered that his attempts at kindness made things worse. He left the apples on the hearth. Eventually the fire consumed them too. When Lockwood visited the Heights in January, he found a scene that disturbed him more than any ghost story. Cathy sat by the window carving figures from turnip parings, sulky and beautiful and utterly alone. Hareton tried to read aloud from a book, Chevy Chase, the old ballad, and Cathy mocked his stumbling pronunciation until his chest heaved with silent rage. He had been teaching himself to read in secret, using a dictionary to work out the hard words, driven by some inarticulate hunger that had everything to do with the girl who now laughed at his efforts. When she read a passage aloud in a mocking drawl, imitating his mistakes, something broke in him. He gathered every book he owned, his entire secret education, and hurled them into the fire. The flames took them in seconds. Cathy watched with indignant eyes, touching her bruised lip where he'd silenced her. She didn't understand yet what she had destroyed. Heathcliff came upon Hareton in the doorway, wrecked with emotion, and asked what was the matter. "Not, not," Hareton said, and broke away to grieve alone. Heathcliff watched him go and whispered something he didn't know anyone could hear. "It will be odd if I thwart myself. But when I look for his father in his face, I find her every day more. How the devil is he so like? I can hardly bear to see him. Her. Always her." Every revenge Heathcliff had ever taken, degrading Hareton, destroying Hindley, forcing Cathy's marriage, seizing 2 estates, all of it was supposed to fill the space Catherine had left. Instead, her features kept surfacing in the face of the boy he'd ruined. The instrument of his vengeance had become a mirror, and the reflection was unbearable. 8 months later, Lockwood returned to find Wuthering Heights transformed. The gate was unlocked, the doors stood open, flowers bloomed in borders that had been weeds. And through the window he saw something that stopped him on the path. Cathy and Hareton bent together over a book, her golden head beside his dark curls, her finger tracing the words while he sounded them out. She was teaching him to read. When he stumbled, she didn't mock. She guided his hand and repeated the word until he had it. When he got a passage right, she kissed his cheek, and he flushed with a joy so pure it seemed to belong to a different house entirely. The girl who had burned his pride was rebuilding it, page by page. The revenge that was supposed to destroy 2 families had accidentally planted the seeds of something Heathcliff had never anticipated, the beginning of love. Cathy and Hareton were planting primroses when Heathcliff found them. She had torn up Joseph's black-currant bushes to make a flower-bed, and Hareton had helped because she asked, which was reason enough for him now. At breakfast she stuck primroses in Hareton's porridge and teased him until he nearly laughed, and Heathcliff's fury erupted like an old reflex. He seized Cathy by the hair and called her a damnable witch. "If you strike me, Hareton will strike you," she said, and for the first time in his life Heathcliff believed it. He looked into her face and froze. Catherine's eyes stared back at him from her daughter's defiant face, and from Hareton's alert, wakened features beside her. He released her hair and stepped back, trembling. Later, alone with Nellie, he confessed, "I get levers and mattocks to demolish the 2 houses, and when everything is ready, I find the will to lift a slate off either roof has vanished. I have lost the faculty of enjoying their destruction, and I am too idle to destroy for nothing." The instrument of his revenge had become a mirror, and the reflection was unbearable. Something was happening to Heathcliff that had no name. He stopped eating. He wandered the moors all night and returned at dawn looking bright, almost cheerful, an expression so foreign on that face that Cathy stopped in the garden to stare. "Last night I was on the threshold of hell," he told Nellie. "Today I am within sight of my heaven. I have my eyes on it, hardly 3 feet to sever me." When she brought him supper that evening, he sat by the open lattice, staring at something in the room that wasn't there, something that gave him both pleasure and pain in exquisite extremes. His eyes tracked it with unwearied diligence, and his fingers clenched before they could reach the bread on his plate, as if the invisible thing were more real than food. "I'm too happy," he whispered, "and yet I'm not happy enough. My soul's bliss kills my body, but does not satisfy itself. The man who had spent 40 years in rage was being consumed by joy instead, and it was destroying him just as efficiently. They found him at dawn in Catherine's old room, the oak-panelled bed with the window flung wide to the rain. The water had soaked his face and pillow and sheets. His eyes were open, keen and fierce, and his lips were parted in what might have been a smile or a snarl. Nelly couldn't tell. She tried to close his eyes, but they wouldn't shut, as if he were still watching whatever had drawn him to that window. His hand rested on the sill, the skin broken where the lattice had scraped it, but no blood ran. The doctor couldn't explain it. Nelly concealed that he hadn't eaten for 4 days. Hareton, the boy Heathcliff had degraded, the instrument of his revenge, sat by the corpse all night. He wept without shame and kissed the sarcastic savage face that everyone else shrank from. He pressed the dead hand and mourned with the strong grief that springs naturally from a generous heart, tough as tempered steel. It was the only honest mourning Heathcliff would receive, and it came from the one person he had wronged most. They buried Heathcliff beside Catherine, as Heap demanded. No minister, no prayers, just Earnshaw and Nelly and the sexton and 6 men who left as soon as the coffin was lowered. Hareton dug green sods and laid them over the brown earth with his own hands. The village people swore they'd seen 2 figures walking the moors together after dark, a man and a woman near the heights, or a shape at that upstairs window on rainy nights. A shepherd boy wept at the crossroads, refusing to pass because Heathcliff and a woman stood under the crag. Nelly said she didn't believe in ghosts, but she wouldn't cross the moor alone after nightfall either. Lockwood found the 3 headstones on the slope beside the kirk, Edgar's neat and greening with moss, Catherine's half buried in heath, Heathcliff's still bare. He stood beneath the quiet sky and watched the moths fluttering among the harebells, and listened to the soft wind breathing through the grass, and wondered how anyone could imagine unquiet slumbers for the sleepers in that quiet earth. But this story isn't just about 2 people who loved each other badly. What Emily Brontë wrote in 1847, at the age of 29, having barely left her father's parsonage in Yorkshire, was something that still unsettles readers almost 2 centuries later. Not because of the romance, but because of what the romance reveals. We think of love stories as stories about finding the right person. Wuthering Heights is a story about what happens when finding the right person isn't enough, when the world you live in, the class you were born into, and the choices you make under pressure conspire to turn your greatest connection into your greatest source of destruction. So let's talk about what this novel is really asking. When Catherine says, "I am Heathcliff," she's not being romantic. She's describing something more radical and more terrifying, a love that has dissolved the boundary between 2 separate people. She doesn't love him the way she loves Edgar, as a choice, a preference, a feeling that could change with the seasons. She loves him the way she loves her own existence, involuntarily, completely, without the possibility of separation. Critics have spent nearly 200 years trying to classify this love. Is it sexual? Is it spiritual? Is it pathological? The answer Brontë seems to offer is, it's ontological. It's a statement about what Catherine is, not what she feels. And that's precisely what makes it so destructive, because you can choose not to act on a feeling, but you can't choose not to be yourself. When she marries Edgar instead, she doesn't stop loving Heathcliff. She stops being whole. The grief that kills her isn't heartbreak. It's a kind of amputation. We can't talk about Heathcliff without talking about what he is, or rather, what Victorian England decided he was. A dark-skinned foundling from the streets of Liverpool, a city built on the slave trade, brought into a white rural family and loved by its patriarch, but treated as subhuman by everyone else. Scholars have read Heathcliff through post-colonial lenses, noting that his systematic dehumanization mirrors the treatment of colonized peoples, denied education, denied dignity, denied even a surname. But what makes Bronte's portrayal extraordinary is that she doesn't sentimentalize his response. Heathcliff doesn't transcend his oppression. He replicates it. He takes every cruelty that was done to him and performs it with surgical precision on the next generation. The degraded boy becomes the degrading master. The outsider seizes the insider's property and then does to Hareton exactly what Hindley did to him. Brontë understood something that most Victorian novelists couldn't admit, that systemic cruelty doesn't produce noble victims. It produces people who have learnt intimately how cruelty works. The novel is built on a geography of opposites. Wuthering Heights sits exposed on the ridge, raw, windswept, violent, honest. Thrushcross Grange lies sheltered in the valley, refined, comfortable, gentle, and a little false. Catherine belongs to both, and therefore to neither. She is wild on the moors and civilized in the parlour, and the effort of maintaining both identities is literally what kills her. Brontë wasn't arguing that one is better than the other. She was showing what happens when a society demands that you choose, when it insists that wildness and refinement can't coexist in the same person, that you must be either a lady or a savage, either Linton's wife or Heathcliff's soulmate. The moors in this novel aren't just scenery, they're a moral landscape, the place where social distinctions dissolve and people face each other as they actually are. Every significant truth in the story is spoken outdoors. Every lie is told inside a house. Is the ghost real? Brontë never answers. She gives us Lockwood's dream, which might be just a dream. She gives us Heathcliff's 18 years of sensing Catherine's presence in every room, which might be madness. She gives us the shepherd boy weeping at the crossroads, because two figures stand under the crag, which might be a child's imagination fed by village gossip. And she gives us Nelly, practical, sceptical Nelly, who says she doesn't believe in ghosts, but won't walk the moor alone after dark. The genius is in the ambiguity. The supernatural in this novel isn't about whether ghosts exist. It's about what it means to be haunted, by grief, by guilt, by love that outlives the body. Heathcliff is haunted by Catherine's absence for 18 years, and that haunting is more real, more damaging and more consuming than any spectre could be. When he finally dies with that strange smile and those eyes that won't close, we're left with the same question the novel opened with: is he at rest or is he still looking? The miracle of Wuthering Heights is that it doesn't end where most tragedies end. After Catherine's death, after Heathcliff's revenge, after everything has been poisoned and stolen and burned, the story keeps going. And in the second generation, something different happens. Cathy and Hareton are not Catherine and Heathcliff. They carry the same blood, the same capacity for stubbornness and passion, but they make different choices. Cathy mocks Hareton's illiteracy, and then, crucially, she repents. She teaches him to read. She apologizes. He forgives. These are small, ordinary acts of grace that the first generation could never manage, because Catherine and Heathcliff were too proud, too absolute, too consumed by a love that left no room for the imperfect, patient, daily work of actually living with another person. The second generation doesn't love less. They love better. And Brontë suggests that this is what redemption looks like. Not a grand gesture, but a primrose stuck in a bowl of porridge, a book shared by a window, a kiss on a reddening cheek. When Wuthering Heights was published in 1847, critics called it savage, disagreeable, and worse. Charlotte Brontë, Emily's sister, felt compelled to write an apologetic preface after Emily's death, explaining that her sister was a recluse who didn't know what she had created. But Emily knew exactly what she had created. She wrote a novel in which love is not gentle, justice is not served, and the hero, if we can call him that, is a man who abuses children, beats women, and opens his beloved's coffin to look at her face. She wrote it without apology, without softening, without the moral reassurance that Victorian readers expected. And then she died at 30, less than a year after publication, having never written another word. The novel she left behind has outlasted every polite book published that decade. It endures because it tells the truth about what passion actually costs, not in the sanitized language of romance, but in the language of bruises, graves, and moors that never stop howling. So what do we take from Wuthering Heights? Perhaps this, that the most dangerous thing in the world is not hatred, but love that doesn't know how to express itself without destruction. That cruelty is not born in a vacuum. It is taught, absorbed, and replicated across generations until someone, somewhere, chooses to break the pattern. That the moors will outlast every human drama played out upon them, and that the wind doesn't care whose name you carve above the door. Lockwood wondered how anyone could imagine unquiet slumbers for the sleepers in that quiet earth. But he was the wrong person to ask. He'd spent 2 chapters at Wuthering Heights and thought he understood it. The truth is, some stories don't settle. They stay in the ground and grow roots, and come up through the heather in shapes you weren't expecting. You close the book, you set it down, and something in you keeps listening for that voice at the window.